was Republic Commando. Hard Contact by Karen Travis.
Chapter 1. Republic assault ship Implacable, inbound for extraction from Geonosis. Scramble line encrypted. Stand by.
Geonosis forward control to fleet support. Ord Mantell. Prepare to receive case-back transport. Med triage team estimates serious injuries. 12,000. Repeat, 12,000. Walking wounded, 8,000. Repeat, 8,000. ETA 10 hours. Logistics priority for back-to-tank support teams. Prep for 72,000 combat-fit troops. Repeat, 72,000. Pending redeployment, priority weapon support for commando units. That is all. Out.
Republic Commando 1136 studied every face in line waiting to board the gunships. Some were helmeted, and some were not. But one way or the other, they all had his face, and they were all strangers.
Move it!
The loadmaster shouted, gesturing side to side with one outstretched arm.
Come on, shift it, people! Fast as you can!
The gunships dropped down in clouds of dust, and troopers embarked, some turning to pull comrades in boards so the ships could lift again quickly. There was no reason to scramble for it. They'd done it 1,000 times in training. Extraction from a real battle was what they prepared for. This wasn't a retreat. They grabbed their first victory. The gunship's downdraft kicked the red Geonosian soil into the air. RC-1136, Darman, took off his helmet and ran his gauntlet carefully across the pale gray dome, wiping away the dust and noting a few scrapes and burn marks. The loadmaster turned to him. He was one of the very, very few outsiders whom Darman had ever seen working with the Grand Army. A short, wrinkled Duros with a temper to match.
Are you embarking or what?
Darman continued wiping his helmet. I'm waiting for my mates, he said.
You shift your shiny silver backside now!
The loadmaster said, irritably.
I got a schedule!
Darman carefully brought up his knuckle blade just under the loadmaster's chin and held it there. He didn't need to eject the vibroblade, and he didn't need to say a word. He'd made his point.
Well, whenever you're ready, sir.
The Duros said, stepping back to chitty clone troopers instead. It wasn't a great idea to upset a commando, especially not one coming down from the adrenaline high of combat. But there was still no sign of the rest of his squad. Darman knew that there was no point waiting any longer. They hadn't called in. Maybe they had combat failures. Maybe they had made it onto another gunship. It was the first time in his artificially short life that Darman hadn't been able to reach out and touch the men that he'd been raised with. He waited half a standard hour more anyway, until the gunships became less frequent, and the lines of troopers became shorter. Eventually, there was nobody standing on the desert plain but him, the Duros loadmaster, and half a dozen clone troopers. It was the last lift of the day.
You better come now, sir.
The loadmaster said.
There's nobody unaccounted for. Nobody alive, anyway.
Darman looked around the horizon one last time, still feeling as if he was turning his back on someone reaching out to him. I'm coming, he said, and brought up the rear of the line. As the gunship lifted, he watched the swirling dust, dwindling rock formations, and scattered shrinking patches of scrub until Geonosis became a blur of dull red. He could still search the Implacable. It wasn't over yet. The gunship slipped into the Implacable's giant document, and Darman looked down into the cavern onto a sea of white armor and whirling movement. The first thing that struck him when the gunship killed its thrusters and locked down its pad was how quiet everyone seemed. In a crowded bay full of troopers, the air stank of sweat and stale fear, and the throat-rasping smell of discharged blaster rifles. But it was so silent that if Darman hadn't seen the evidence of exhausted and injured men, he'd have believed that nothing significant had happened in the last 30 hours. The deck vibrated under the soles of his boots. He was still staring down at them, studying the random patterns of Geonosian dust that clung to them, when an identical pair came into view. Number, said a voice that was also his own. The commander swept in with a tally sensor. He didn't need Darman to tell him his number or anything else for that matter, because the sensors in the enhanced guitar and armor reported his status silently, electronically. No significant injury. The triage team on Geonosis had waved him past, concentrating on the injured, ignoring both those too badly hurt to help and those who could help themselves. Are you listening to me? Come on, talk to me, son. I'm okay, sir, he said. Sir, RC-1136. I'm not in shock. I'm fine. He paused. Nobody else was going to call him by his squad nickname, Darman, again. They were all dead. He knew it. Jay, Vin, Tyler. He just knew. Sir, any news of RC-1135? No, said the commander, who had obviously heard similar questions every time he stopped to check. He gestured with a small bar in his hand. If they're not in case back, or listed on this sweep, they didn't make it. It was a stupid question to ask. Darman should have known better. Clone troopers, and especially Republic commandos, just got on with the job. That was their sole purpose, and they were lucky their training sergeant had told them, outside in the ordinary world, every being from every species in the galaxy fretted about their purpose in life, searching for meaning. A clone didn't need to. Clones knew. They had been perfected for their role, and doubt, he'd never troubled them. Darman had never known what doubt was until now. No amount of training had prepared him for this. He found a space against the bulkhead and sat down. A clone trooper settled down next to him, squeezing into the gap and briefly clunking a shoulder blade against his. They glanced at each other. Darman rarely had any contact with the other clones. Commandos trained apart from everyone, including ARC troopers. The troopers' armor was white, lighter, less resistant. Commandos enjoyed upgraded protection, and Darman displayed no rank colors, but they both knew exactly who and what they were. Nice DC, the trooper said enviously. He was looking at the DC-17. Troopers were issued the heavier, low-spec rifle, the DC-15. Ion pulse, RPG, anti-armor, and sniper? Yeah. Every item of his gear was manufactured to a higher spec. A trooper's life was less valuable than a commando's. It was the way things were. And Darman had never questioned it, not for long anyway. Full house. Tidy. The trooper nodded approval. Job done, eh? Yeah, Darman said quietly. Job done. The trooper didn't say anything else. Maybe he was wary of conversation with commandos. Darman knew what troopers thought about him and his kind. They don't train like us. They don't fight like us. They don't even talk like us. A bunch of prima donnas. Darman didn't think he was arrogant. It was just that he could do every job a soldier could be called upon to do, and then some. Siege assault, counterinsurgency, hostage extraction, demolitions, assassinations, surveillance, and every kind of infantry activity on any terrain and in any environment at any time. He knew he could, because he'd done it. He'd done it in training, first with simunition and then with live rounds. He'd done it with his squad, the 3 brothers with whom he'd spent every moment of his conscious life. They competed against other squads, thousands just like them, but not like them, because they were squad brothers, and that was special. He had never been taught how to live apart from his squad, though. Now, he would learn the hardest way of all. Darman had absolute confidence that he was one of the best special ops soldiers ever created. He was undistracted by the everyday concerns of raising a family and making a living, things that his instructor said he was lucky never to know. But now he was alone, very, very alone. It was very distracting indeed. He considered this for a long time in silence. Surviving when the rest of your squad had been killed was no cause for pride. It felt instead like something his training sergeant had described as shame. That was what he felt when he lost the battle, apparently. But they had won. It was their first battle, and they had won. The landing ramp on the Implacable eased down, and the bright sunlight of Ord Mantell streamed in. Darman replaced his helmet without thinking and stood in an orderly line, waiting to disembark and be reassigned. He was going to be chilled down, kept in suspended animation until duty called again. So this was the aftermath of victory. He wondered how much worse defeat might feel. Imbrani, Kulara, 40 light years from Ord Mantell, Tingle Arm. The field of bark flowed from silver to ruby as the wind from the southwest bent the ripening grain in waves. It could have been a perfect late summer day. Instead, it was turning into one of the worst days of Etain Termugan's life. Etain had run, and she had nothing left in her. She flung herself flat between the furrows, not caring where she fell. Etain held her breath as something stinking and wet squelched under her. The pursuing Weequay couldn't hear her above the wind, she knew, but she held her breath anyway.
Hey, girlie.
His boots crunched closer. He was panting.
Where you go? Don't be shy. I got bottle of alcohol. You want to have party?
He had a remarkably large vocabulary for a Weequay, all of it centered on his baser needs.
I fun when you get to know me.
I should have waited for it to get dark, Etain thought to herself. I could influence his mind, try to make him leave. But she hadn't, and she couldn't, try as she might to concentrate. She was too full of adrenaline and uncontrolled panic.
Come on, you scraggin. Where are you? I find you.
He sounded as if he was kicking his way through the crop and getting closer. If she got up and ran for it, she was dead. If she stayed where she was, he'd find her, eventually. He wasn't going to get bored, and he wasn't going to give up.
Girlie.
The Weequay's voice was close, to her right, about 20 meters away. She sipped a strangled breath and clamped her lips shut again, lungs aching, eyes streaming with the effort.
Girlie.
Closer. He was going to stick right on her.
Girlie.
She knew what he'd do when he found her. If she was lucky, he'd kill her afterwards.
Girl.
The Weequay was interrupted by a loud, wet thwack. He let out a grunt, and then there was a second thwack. Shorter, sharper, harder. Etain heard a squeal of pain.
How many times do I have to tell you, Dotfoot?
It was a different voice, human, with a hard edge of authority. Thwack!
Don't waste my time.
Another thwack, another squeal. Etain kept her face pressed in the dirt.
You get drunk one more time. You go chasing females one more time, and I'm gonna slit you from here to here.
The Weequay shrieked. It was a sort of incoherent animal sound that beings made when pain overwhelmed them. Etain had heard too much of that sound in her short time on Kulara. Then there was silence. She hadn't heard the voice before, but she didn't need to. She knew exactly who it belonged to. Etain strained to listen, half expecting a boot to suddenly stamp on her back. But all she could hear was the swish and crunch of 2 pairs of feet wading through the crop, away from her. She caught snatches of the fading conversation as the wind took it. The Weequay was still being berated.
More important.
What was?
Right now, Dotcut. I need you to. Okay? Or I'll cut.
Etain waited. Eventually, all she could hear was the breath of the wind, the rustling of grain, and the occasional fluting call of a ground eel seeking a mate. She allowed herself to breathe normally again, but still she waited, face down in ripe manure, until dusk started to fall. She had to move now. The Gadans would be out hunting, combing the field in packs. On top of that, the smell that hadn't bothered her while she was gripped by terror was starting to really bother her now. She eased herself up on her elbows, then her knees, and looked around. Why do they have to manure bark so they can seize it anyway? She thought to herself. She fumbled in the pockets of her cloak for a cloth. Now, if she could only find a string, she could clean herself up. She pulled a handful of stalks, crushed them into a ball, and tried to scrape off the worst of the dung and debris stuck to her. That's a pretty expensive crop to be used for that, a voice said. Etain gulped in a breath and spun around to find a local in a grubby smock scowling at her. He looked thin, worn out, and annoyed. He was holding a threshing tool. Do you know how much that stuff's worth? I'm sorry, she said, sliding her hand carefully inside her cloak. She felt for the familiar cylinder. She hadn't wanted the Weequay to know she was a Jedi, but if this farmer was considering turning her in for a few loaves or a bottle of her qual, she needed her lightsaber handy. It was your bark all my life, I'm afraid. The farmer stared at the crushed stalks and the scattered bead-like grains, tight-lipped. Yes, bark fetched a huge price in the restaurants of Coruscant. It was a luxury, and the people who grew it for export couldn't afford it. That didn't seem to bother the Neimoidians who controlled the trade. It never did. I'll pay for the damage, Etain said, her hand still inside the cloak. What were they after you for? The farmer asked, ignoring her offer. The usual, she said. Oh, you're not that good looking. Charming. I know who you are. Her grip closed. You do? I reckon. A little more food for his family. A few hours drunk in oblivion, courtesy of Urquhart. That was all she was to him. He made as if to step closer, and she drew her arm clear of the cloak, because she was fed up with running, and she didn't like the look of that threshing tool. Oh, great, the farmer sighed, eyeing the shaft of pure blue light. Not one of you lot. That's all we need. Yes, she said, and held the lightsaber steady in front of her face. Her stomach had nodded, but she kept her voice under control. I am Padawan Etain Termugan. You can try to turn me in if you want to test my skill, but I prefer that you help me instead. Your call, sir. The farmer stared at the lightsaber as if he was trying to work out a price for it. It didn't help your master much, that thing, did it? Master Fulia was unfortunate and betrayed. She lowered the lightsaber but did not cut the beam. Are you going to help me? We're going to have Gez, Hawkins, thugs all over us if I think they're busy, Etain said. What do you want from us? Shelter, for the moment. The farmer sucked his teeth thoughtfully. Okay, come on, Padawan. Get used to calling me Etain, please. She thumbed off the lightsaber. The light died with a foom sound, and she slipped the hilt back inside her cloak. Just to be on the safe side. Etain trailed after him, not trying to smell herself, but it was hard, nauseatingly hard. Even a scent-hunting Gadan wouldn't recognize her as a human. It was getting dark now, and the farmer kept glancing over his shoulder at her. Oh, he shook his head, engaged in some internal conversation. I'm Burhan, and this is my land. And I thought you lot were supposed to be able to use some sort of mind control tricks. How do you know that I haven't? Etain lied. Oh, he said, and nothing more. She wasn't going to volunteer the obvious if he hadn't spotted it for himself. A disappointment to her master, she was clearly not the best of the bunch. She struggled with the Force, and she grappled with self-discipline. And she was here because she and Master Fullier happened to be nearby when a job needed doing. Fullier never could resist a challenge and long nods, and it looked as if he paid the price. They hadn't found his body yet, but there had been no word from him either. Yes, Etain was a Padawan, technically speaking. She just happened to be one who was a breath away from building permadomes and refugee camps. She reasoned that part of a Jedi's skill was the simple use of psychology, and if Burhan wanted to think the Force was strong in her, and that there was a lot more behind the external shell of a gawky, plain girl covered in stinking dung, then that was fine by her. It would keep her alive a little longer, while she worked out what to do next.
Fleet support, Ord Mantell. Barrack block, 5 Epsilon.
It was a waste, a rotten waste. RC-1309 busied himself maintaining his boots. He cleaned out the clamps, blowing the red dust clear with a squirt of air from the pressure gun. He rinsed the liners and shipped them dry. There was no point being idle while he was waiting to be chilled down. Sergeant? He looked up. The commando who had walked in placed his survival pack, armor, and black bodysuit on the bunk opposite and stared back. His readout panel identified him as RC-8015. On fee, he said, and held out his hand for shaking. So you lost your squad too?
Naya,
RC-1309 said without taking the proffered hand.
so Nevod, my brother, you're the sole survivor?
Yeah.
Did you just hold back while your brothers pressed on, or were you just lucky?
Fee stood there with his hands on his hips, identical to Niner in every way, except that he was different. He spoke a little different. He smelled subtly different. He moved his hands not like Niner's squad did. Not at all. I did my job, Fee said carefully. And I'd rather be with them than here, Nevod. Niner considered him for a while, and went back to cleaning his boots. Fee put his kit in the locker beside the bunks, then swung himself up to the top rack in one smooth motion. He folded his arms under his head very precisely, and lay staring up at the bulkhead as if he were meditating. If he had been Sev, Niner would have known exactly what he was doing, even without looking. But Sev was gone. Clone troopers lost brothers in training. So did commandos. But troopers were socialized, and with whole sections, platoons, companies, even regiments. And that meant that even after the inevitable deaths and removals during live exercises, there were still plenty of people around whom you knew well. Commandos worked solely with each other. Niner had lost everyone he had grown up with, and so had Fee. He'd lost a brother before, 2-8, on exercise. The 3 survivors had welcomed the replacement, although they had always felt he was slightly different, a little distant, as if he had never quite believed he'd been accepted. But they performed to expected levels of excellence together, and as long as they did, their Kaminoan technicians and motley band of alien instructors didn't seem to care how they felt about it. But the commandos cared. They just kept it to themselves.
It was a waste.
Niner said. What was? Fee said.
Deploying us in an operation like Geonosis. It was an infantry job, not special ops.
That sounds like criticism of...
I'm just making the point that we couldn't perform to maximum effectiveness.
Understood. Maybe when we revived, we'll be able to do what we're really trying for. Niner wanted to say that he missed his squad, but that wasn't something to confide in a stranger. He inspected his boots and was satisfied. Then he stood up and spread his bodysuit flat on the mattress and checked it for vacuum integrity with the sweep sensor in his glove. It was a ritual so ingrained in him that he hardly thought about it. Maintain boots, suit, and armor plates. Recalibrate helmet systems. Check heads up display. Strip down and reassemble DC-17. Empty and repack survival pack. Done. It took him 26 minutes and 20 seconds. Give or take 2 seconds. Well-maintained gear was often the difference between life and death. So was 2 seconds. He closed the top of his pack with a clack and secured the seal. Then he checked the catches that held the separate ordnance pack to see that they were moving freely. That mattered when he needed to jettison explosive materials fast. When he glanced up, Fee was propped up on one elbow, looking down at him from the bunk. Dry rations go on the 5th layer, he said. Niner always packed them further down, between his spare repelling line and his hygiene kit.
In your squad, maybe.
He said, and carried on. Fee took the hint and rolled over on his back again, no doubt to meditate on how differently things might be done in the future. After a while, he started singing very quietly, almost under his breath. They were the wrath of the warrior shadows, and the gauntlet of the republics. Niner knew the song. It was a traditional Mandalorian war chant, designed to boost the morale of normal men who needed a bit of psyching up before a fight. The words had been altered a little to have meaning for the armies of clone warriors.
We don't need all that.
Niner thought.
We were born to fight, nothing else.
But he found himself joining in anyway. It was a comfort. He placed his gear in the locker, rolled onto his bunk, and matched note and beat perfectly with Fee. 2 identical voices in the deserted barrack. Niner would have traded every remaining moment of his life for a chance to rerun the previous day's engagement. He would have held Sev and Didi back. He would have sent 04 West with his E-webcam, but he hadn't. Our vengeance burns brighter still. Fee's voice trailed off in the silence, in the merest fraction of a second before Niner's. He heard him swallow hard.
I was up there with him, Sarge.
He said quietly.
I didn't hang back. Not at all.
Niner closed his eyes. He regretted hinting that Fee might have done anything less.
I know, brother.
He said.
I know.
Chapter 2.
Clone personnel have free will, even if they do follow orders. If they couldn't think for themselves, we'd be better off with droids, and they're a lot cheaper too. They have to be able to respond to situations we can't imagine. Will that change them in ways we can't predict? Perhaps. But they have to be mentally equipped to win wars. Now thaw those men out. They have a job to do.
Jedi Master Arlagan Zay, Intelligence Officer. Secure briefing room, fleet support, Ord Mantell, 3 standard months after Geonosis.
Fleet support base hadn't been built to accommodate tens of thousands of troops, and it showed. The briefing room was a cold store, and it still smelled of food and spices. Garmin could see the loading rails that spanned the ceiling, but he kept his focus on the holoscreen in front of him. It didn't feel so bad to be revived after stasis. He was still a commando. They hadn't reconditioned him. That meant he'd performed to expected standards at Geonosis. He'd done well. He felt positive. But his helmet felt different. There was a lot more data on the HUD, the heads-up display. He flicked between modes for a while, controlling each command with rapid blinks, noting the extra systems and hardware that had been installed since Geonosis. Sitting to his left was his new sergeant, who preferred to be called Niner when superior officers weren't around, and RC-8015, nicknamed Fee. They too were the sole survivors of their squads. At least they knew what he was going through. There was a 4th makeshift seat in the row, a blue alloy packing crate, and it was unoccupied. Jedi Master Arlagan Zay, hands clasped behind his back, paced up and down in front of the screen, cloak flapping, breaking the hollow projection each time. Another Jedi, who had not been identified, was splitting his attention between Zay and the 3 helmeted commandos sitting absolutely still on the front row of crates. The reflective surfaces on the spray-clean alloy walls enabled Darman to discreetly observe an unusual alien, one he had never seen before. He had been trained to take in every detail of his surroundings, although it was very difficult not to notice the creature. The alien was about 1.5 meters long, and it was slinking around the walls, sniffing. Black-furred and glossy, it prowled on long, delicate legs, thrusting a narrow muzzle into crevices and exhaling sharply each time it did. Earlier, Darman had heard Zay address it as Valaquil. He also said it was a Gerlanan, a shapeshifter. Darman had heard about shapeshifters in training, but this wasn't a Clawdite. He was watching its reflection in his right field peripheral vision when the door swung open and another commando entered, helmet tucked rigidly under his right arm, and saluted smartly. Aussie 3222, sir. Apologies for keeping you, sir. The medics didn't want to discharge me. No wonder. There was a stripe of raw flesh across his face that started just under his right eye, ran clean across his mouth, and finally ended at the left side of his jaw. He certainly didn't look like any of the other clones now. Darman wondered what level of persuasion it had taken to get the medical staff to skip a course of Baghdad.
Are you fit, soldier?
Zay said. Fit to fight, sir. He sat down next to Darman and assumed the same ramrod posture, glancing at him briefly in acknowledgement. So this was their fourth man. They were a squad again. Numerically, anyway. Omega Squad. The other Jedi was staring at the newcomer with an expression of barely concealed astonishment. Zay seemed to notice and nudged his colleague.
Padawan Jusik is new to clone armies, as are we all.
That was understandable. Darman had never seen Jedi before the Battle of Geonosis, and he was equally fascinated.
You'll excuse his curiosity.
Zay gestured at the holoscreen.
This is your objective, gentlemen. Kilara.
He glanced at his datapad, reading intently.
This data has been obtained from high-altitude reconnaissance, so it has its limitations.
Zay went on.
Kilara is technically neutral. Unfortunately, its neutral status is likely due to end very soon.
He had referred to them as gentlemen. Maybe Zay didn't know what to call commandos. It was still early days for all of them. The image on the screen began as a blue and white disc, zooming into views of chains of islands, deep river inlets, and rolling plains peppered with patches of woodland and game-board fields. It looked pleasant and peaceful, and hence utterly alien to Darman, whose entire life beyond Tapoka City had been spent on battlefields, real or virtual.
You're looking at farming communities, almost all of them located here in this region because it's the most fertile land.
Zay said.
They produce bark, kushayan, and 50% of the luxury foodstuffs and beverages in the galaxy. There's also gem mining. The population is nevertheless living at subsistence level, and there is no government other than the law of commerce and profit. Neomoidian traders effectively own the planet, or at least the productive areas that are of use to them. They enforce their stewardship through a militia controlled by Gez Hogan, a Mandalorian, so unpleasantly violent that he was actually asked to leave the Death Squad for enjoying his work too much.
Jusik looked up from his datapad. He appeared to be following the presentation. Scum, he said. One of our sources calls them scum, indicating a very disagreeable group of people. Zay paused for breath, as if to ensure that the last snippet of information had made its point.
Given how thinly stretched our resources are, we are unfortunately unable to justify intervening to deal with any injustice on Kilara at this time. But we have excellent intelligence that indicates a significant military asset is located there. Darman was listening, and still watching the Gerlanan peripherally. It had moved across the room to sit upright beside Jusik, with its front paws neatly clasped before its chest. He was also observing Jusik. The Padawan still appeared riveted by the commandos. Darman was careful not to stare, even though any eye movement was disguised by his helmet, because Jedi knew things without having to see. His instructors had told him so. Jedi were omniscient, omnipotent, and had to be obeyed at all times. Darman hung on Zay's every word. Kilara isn't on the main line, so to speak.
Zay said.
Ideal for hiding, if that's your intention, and there are things hidden there. We need you to apprehend one and destroy the other. A separatist scientist, Overlord Quail Uthan, and her most recent project, a nanovirus. We have reason to believe both are at a research facility on Kilara.
Zay paused, and Jusik filled the space. We have a Jedi there, Master Castfulier, but we haven't heard from him or his Padawan in some weeks. Zay picked up again.
And let me assure you that we've been searching diligently for them. We have a location for our targets, but no plans of the buildings. The lack of plans will make your retrieval and sabotage task more challenging, as will the communication situation. Questions?
Niner raised a gloved hand from his lap.
Sir, what is the comm situation exactly?
Neomoidians.
Not quite with you, sir.
Zay looked blank for a moment, and then his face lit up with revelation.
The Neomoidians own and control all the infrastructure. The native population scarcely have pits for refreshers, but their overlords enjoy the finest comlink net and air traffic control that credits can buy. They like to ensure that nobody does business without their knowledge, so they monitor everything and very little intelligence comes out. You'll have to avoid using the long-range comlink. Do you understand me, soldier?
Sir, yes, sir, General Zay.
There was a pause, a long pause, and Zay looked along the row of 3 helmets and a damaged face, as if waiting for something. The Jedi had said he hadn't worked with clones before. Maybe he was expecting a dialogue. He stopped at Darman. The potential embarrassment to the Master prompted Darman to fill the silent void. It was an obvious question to ask, really.
What's the nature of the nanovirus, sir?
Zay's head moved back just a fraction.
An intelligent and significant question,
He said.
Thank you, sir.
The answer, then, should be of great interest to you personally. It appears to be specifically aimed at clone personnel.
The sleek black Gerlanan drew itself up to a greater height.
They fear you, and with good reason.
It said in a deep, liquid voice.
So they wish to kill, as all ignorant beings do when they encounter something they fear and misunderstand.
It continued elongating, and now appeared to be standing. It had changed shape.
Yes.
Zay said slowly, dragging the word into 2 syllables, and he looked away from the spectacle of molecular rearrangement.
At this time, you still have an advantage. The Separatists almost certainly aren't aware of your potential as clone commandos. They have no idea what you can achieve, and perhaps we have no idea either. But you have been created for excellence and trained to realize that potential by the most experienced instructors in the galaxy. We have very high expectations.
Zay slipped his hands into his cloak, head lowered slightly.
If you happen to find Master Fulia safe, we would be relieved. But Uthan and the facility are your main priorities. Do you understand everything I've said?
Yes, sir.
Darman nodded once, and so did the others. But it wasn't quite a synchronized movement. We'll get it right, he thought. A couple of days training, that'll sort it out. Train hard, fight easy.
I'll leave you to my Padawan then,
Zay said, and swept out, pausing briefly at the door to look back at the commandos, tilting his head as if he was either amazed or amused. Jusik swallowed hard. The Gerlanan flowed from a column back into a 4-limbed thing, and moved to sit beside RC-3222, gazing up at him. The commando didn't react.
Ah,
It sighed. It had a voice like running water.
my. That is indeed Vet's face. Fascinating.
Jussic gestured to the exit. I'm your armorer, he said. Weapons and data. Follow me and I'll show you what you'll have at your disposal. The commandos rose as one, more or less, and followed him through the door and down a passage still strewn with victualling containers. The place smelled of stewed nerf, even through Darman's filtration mask. The Gerlanen flowed before them, now a sinuous predator, now a trotting quadruped, shifting shape as it went. Jussic stopped at the door at the end of the passage and turned to them. I wonder if I could ask the rest of you to remove your helmets. Nobody asked why, and they all obeyed, even though it wasn't phrased as the unequivocal order they were expecting. The helmet seals made faint sounds as they opened. Oh, Jussic said and stared for a second. He opened the door and they stepped into the makeshift armory. It was a cache of treasures. There were upgrades and bolt-ons that Darman knew might fit his existing gear, and ordnance that he didn't recognize but looked like Republic issue, and there were exotics. Weapons he recalled from his database as belonging to a dozen different species, and quite a few that he couldn't place at all, were laid out neatly on trestle tables. It was inviting, almost as inviting as a meal. That all looks rather useful, sir, Niner said. Delta Squad has been collecting a few things here and there, Jussic said. The commandos were focused on the weaponry, but Darman was also noting Jussic's behavior with growing interest. The Padawan stood back to let the men get a closer look at the armaments, but he was watching them carefully. You're nothing like droids at all, are you? No, sir. We're flesh and blood, bred to be the best. You mean like advanced recon commandos? Not quite ARC, sir. Not like clone troopers either. We don't work alone, and we don't work in formations. We just look the same. This is your unit of 4 then? A squad? He seemed to be recalling a hurried lesson. Almost like a family. Niner cut in. It is now, sir. He picked up a portable missile launcher that looked slightly different from the standard issue Plex. Light. Very light. Mearson prototype. Novel alloy, heavier payloads, extra range. It has a micro-repulsor lift stabilizing unit, but they haven't resolved all the more challenging technical issues yet, so consider it shoulder launching. He peered at 322's face. Is that painful? Not bad, sir, the commando said, but the wound had to hurt like fire. The abraded skin was still weeping. I'll see to it later. It didn't seem to be the answer Jussic was expecting, judging by the slight sound he made. Maybe he thought clones didn't feel pain like droids. Do you have names? I don't mean like numbers, names. Now that was a very private thing. You kept your name to yourself, your squad, and your training sergeant. Darman was embarrassed for you. My squad called me Atten, the wounded commando said. Niner glanced at Fee but said nothing. Atten was Mandalorian for stubborn. Jussic held up 2 reels of lines that looked like matte ribbon, one black, one white. He took a ribbon of each color, twisted 2 short links together, and held up the braid in one hand and a bead-sized detonator in the other. 1 meter is the equivalent yield of a thermal detonator, but it's directional, ideal for making a frame charge. But be cautious with the quantity if you want to enter a building, rather than destroy it completely. You have some special implosion ordnance for that purpose. Any useful hand-thrown stuff? Darman asked. Stun grenades? We have a few Geonosian sonic detonators and a box of EMPs for anti-droid use. That'll do me fine. I'll take the lot. Niner was watching Darman intently. You're obviously our demolitions man, he said. Then the sergeant turned back to the Padawan. We've been thoroughly trained, sir. You can have complete confidence in us. That was true, Darman thought. They had been very thoroughly trained, day in, day out, for 10 years, and the only time they weren't training was when they were sleeping. Even if they were untested as a special forces unit, apart from playing infantry 3 months ago, Darman had no doubt they would perform to expected standards. He was happy to have the demolition role. He was proud of his skill in what was delicately known as rapid entry. What do you think happened to Master Fulia, sir? Darman asked. He wouldn't normally have posed unnecessary questions, but Arligan Zay had seemed to approve of his curiosity, and Darman was conditioned to do whatever Jedi generals wished. Jussic opened a case of Camino saber darts and held it out as if offering a tray of ooze cakes. Valaquil believes he was betrayed by a native, he said. They've been known to do anything to earn food or a few credits. Darman wondered how a Jedi could be taken by anything less than an army. He'd seen them fight at Geonosis. His warfare was a science. Theirs appeared to be an art. Didn't he have his lightsaber?
He did,
The Gerlanen said.
but Master Fulia has, or had, some discipline issues.
Darman, a soldier able to withstand every privation in the field, and whose greatest fear was to wither from age rather than die in combat, felt inexplicably uncomfortable at the idea of a Jedi having failings. Master Fulia is a courageous Jedi, Jussic said, almost losing his composed manner for a moment.
He is simply passionate about justice.
Niner diffused the moment. Darman felt reassured by his effortless authority. Sir, how long have we got to plan the mission and attempt a few dry runs? He said.
8 standard hours,
Jussic replied, almost apologetic.
because that's how long the journey to Kilara will take.
You're embarking now.
Imbrani, Kilara.
Etain emptied her bag on the straw mattress in the drying barn. Despite appearances, this was the guest suite. Livestock wasn't allowed in the barn at this time of year because animals had a tendency to eat the bark grain, and that was an awfully expensive way to fatten Merleys for the table. The animals were allowed in the main house, and in the winter they even slept there, partly to keep the place warm and partly to protect them from prowling Gadans. The house had smelled like it too. Nothing of the Merleys, not even their body heat or their pungent odor, was ever wasted.
Keeps the bugs away.
Burhan had told her.
It's a good stink.
Etain knelt beside the mattress and tried to think of a way out of her predicament. Master Fulier was probably dead. If he weren't, he would have returned for her. He had been, brilliant, magnificently skilled when he was focused on being so. But he was also impatient and inclined not to walk away from matters that weren't his concern, and those were 2 factors that didn't mix well with a covert mission. He decided one of Hogan's thugs needed to learn a lesson in how to respect the local population. All it took was for one of the Mandalorian's lieutenants to offer the same locals more than the price of a bottle of Raqual to say where and when Fulier was in town. Town. That was a joke. Imbrani wasn't Coruscant, not at all. The only infrastructure in the rambling collection of farmsteads was devoted to what it took to grow, harvest, and export its cash crops, and to the comfort of its commercial overlords. Etain had grown up in a world where you could travel at will and send messages easily, and neither of those taken for granted facilities was readily available here. Etain needed one of 2 things right now: to get passage off Kilara, or to get a data transmission out in her stead. She still had a mission to complete, if only to justify Master Fulier's sacrifice. She took a small sphere from the scattering of possessions on the mattress and opened it into 2 halves like a chef's fruit. A holochart blossomed into 3 dimensions in her cupped hands, then another, then another. She had layouts of half a dozen Neomoidian and Separatist buildings in the surrounding region, because Fulier hadn't been the only one who was careless. After a few bottles of her call, the local construction workers dropped their guards. Etain was neither a natural warrior nor a great charmer, but she was aware of her talent for spotting opportunities. It made up for a lot. She wasn't sure if her master's fate was tied into the Hollow schematics, or if he'd been seen as a direct threat to Uthon. She suspected Gez Hogan might even have done something simply because he didn't care much for Jedi. Play warriors, he called them. He despised anyone who didn't fight with hard metal or their fists. Mandalorians were tough, but Hogan operated at a totally different level of brutality. Etain had realized that the moment she and Folier had walked through what was left of a four-house village that must have displeased him in some way. She would never erase those images from her mind. She meditated hard twice a day, still wasn't helping. Settling down on her knees, she tried again, slowing her breathing, calming her heart. The gravel outside the barn crunched. Etain picked up her lightsaber from the mattress as she stuffed the hollow chart sphere in her tunic. Her thumb hovered over the controls set in the hilt. She should have sensed someone coming, but she allowed her fatigue and despair to get the better of her.
I didn't check for another exit.
She thought.
Stupid, stupid, stupid. I might have to use this.
As the plank door swung open, she flipped the button and the blue light pierced the dusty air. The Merle that wandered in didn't appear impressed, nor did the small elderly woman who followed it.
You're jumping.
She said. She had a covered tray in her hands and something bundled under one arm. The Merle nuzzled Etain's knees, seeking attention. They were distressingly intelligent animals, nearly a meter high at the shoulder and covered with long brown ringlets of wool. Their round green eyes were too disturbingly human for Etain's peace of mind.
Here's your dinner. Thank you.
Etain said, watching as the woman put the tray down on the mattress and placed the bundle of brown fabric beside it.
Quite a job getting that dung off your cloak.
The woman said, eyeing the lightsaber the way that Rahan had.
Still a bit damp, but clean. Thank you.
Etain repeated. She turned off the blade and peeled the cloth back from the tray. Two rough clay plates held a couple of thin breads and a mush of stew, on top of which whole bark grains were visible. She could smell their cloying, musky scent. That quantity of bark was a week's earning for these people.
You shouldn't have gone to that trouble for me.
Etain said, embarrassed.
You're a guest.
The woman said.
Besides, once I'd scraped the dung off, shame to waste grain stuck to a day. Oh, aye.
Etain's stomach rolled, but she kept a steady expression. Coruscant's food hygiene regulations certainly didn't apply here.
Very good of you.
She said, and forced a smile.
They're coming, you know.
The woman said.
I'll be ready.
Etain lied and indicated the lightsaber.
No, not them Hogan thugs. Not them at all.
Etain wondered whether to press her, but decided against it for the time being. She had no idea who she'd be asking for answers. The woman sighed and shooed the Merle out the door with impatient hands.
They're coming all right.
She said, and smiled, closing the door behind her.
Classified, highest, encryption only.
You're the best in your field. The best soldiers, tacticians, sappers, communicators, survival experts. I picked you personally because I want you to train the best commandos in the galaxy. You'll have everything you need, whatever you want except one thing. Home. This is a top secret project. You'll not tell anyone where you're going, and you'll not leave Camino, ever. As far as your friends and family are concerned, you're already dead.
Jango Fett recruiting his hand-picked commando instructors, the Kul Valdar, in the Mandalorian tongue, those who no longer exist.
Chapter 3. The Neimoidians had a taste for elaborate and wholly inappropriate grandeur, and Gez Hogan despised them for it. Lik Ankit's huge villa was set on top of a hill overlooking a Kushayan plantation, a foolish choice given the prevailing winds, but it seemed to satisfy the Neimoidians' need to show he was boss. The location might have made sense from a military perspective, but as Ankit was a bean-counting coward like all of his kind, he didn't need defensibility either. No, the Neimoidian was a Dakut, a complete and utter Dakut. Hogan ran up the hedge-flanked steps of the veranda spanning the entire front of the building, headdress tucked under one arm, his shattergun, knives, and rope spike provocatively visible on his belt. He wasn't rushing to see his paymaster, oh no. He was just in a hurry to get the meeting over with. He ignored the servants and minions and swept into Ankit's spacious office with its panoramic view of the countryside. Kilara's commercial overlord was watering pots of flowers on the windowsill. He paused to flick one with his fingertip, and it sprayed a powerful, sickly scent into the air. He inhaled with parted lips.
I do wish you would knock, Hogan.
Ankit said without turning around.
It's really most discourteous. You summoned me. Merely checking on the progress of your conversations with the Jedi. Had there been any, I would have called you. You haven't killed him, have you? Do tell me you haven't. I need to know if his activities will affect market prices. I'm not an amateur, but one has to do the best with the staff one has, yes? I do my own dirty work, thanks. No, he isn't talking. He's rather resistant for a Jedi.
If Ankit had had a nose, he would have been looking down at Hogan. Hogan controlled an impulsive urge to cut this glorified shopkeeper, this grocer, down to size. For all his height, the Neimoidian was soft and weak, his only strength contained within his bank account. He blinked his passionless, liquid red eyes. Hogan almost reached for his rope spike.
Jedi do not visit worlds like this to take the therapeutic waters, Hogan. Have you confirmed that he has an associate? He's a Jedi Master. He was seen with a Padawan. Not a very discreet Jedi Master, it seems.
Folier couldn't have been good at calculating odds, or he'd never have started in on Garul in the tavern. But at least he was prepared to stand up for himself, despite all that soft and mystical nonsense he spouted. Hogan admired guts, even if he rarely tolerated them. They were always in short supply.
We'll find the Padawan, and we'll find out what intelligence Folier has, if any. Make sure that you do. I have a lucrative contract resting on this.
Hogan had become practiced at controlling his urge to lash out, but he saw no reason to subject his mouth to the same discipline.
If I succeed, it'll be because I take pride in my work. You need the credits. For the time being. But one day, Ankit, I won't need you at all.
Ankit gathered his robes a little closer and drew himself up to his full height, which had no effect on Hogan at all.
You must learn to accept your reduced station in the Galactic Order, Hogan,
Ankit said.
This is no longer the hierarchy of brute force in which your warrior ancestors thrived. Today, we need to be soldiers of intellect and commerce, and no amount of strutting around in that museum piece of uniform will revive your glorious past. Alas, even the greater Jango Fett succumbed to a Jedi in the end.
News traveled fast. Fett was a source of pride among the remaining handful of Mandalorians in diaspora. Even if he fought for money, he was the best. Ankit must have known perfectly well how much that comment would sting. Hogan was determined that the Neimoidian would see no evidence on his face to prove it. He'd certainly tried to keep that out of his mind when he was interrogating Folier, much as he wanted to blame all Jedi for the humiliation of a cultural hero. He had to be clear why he was smashing the Jedi's bones. Revenge was unprofessional. He took a careful breath.
Do you keep Gedans as pets, Ankit? I hear some off-worlders do try. Gedans? No. Filthy little creatures. Most savage. But if you did keep one and didn't feed it well, would you be surprised if it bit you? I suppose not. Then feed me well.
Hogan turned and walked out without being dismissed, deliberately unbidden and deliberately fast so that Ankit couldn't have the last word. He replaced his helmet and ran down the steps of the ludicrously extravagant villa. He didn't care if Ankit rented the whole planet out to separatist scientists. They weren't honorable enough to fight with real weapons either. They got bugs to do their work for them. It was a disgrace. It was unnatural. Hogan felt in his blood-red jacket for the Jedi's weapon. It didn't look like much at all. It was surprisingly easy to activate, even though he suspected that fully mastering it might be another matter. A humming blue shaft of light, vivid as day, shot out from the hilt. Hogan swept it scythe-style along an evenly clipped caramel hedge, cutting its height in half. The lightsaber wasn't bad for a soft Jedi weapon. Hogan suspected the lightsaber looked at odds with his traditional Mandalorian helmet and its distinctive T-shaped eye slit. But a warrior had to adapt, and Fuller had questions to answer.
Docking Bay D768, Fleet Support Air Station, Ord Mantell.
The Nar Shaddaa agri-utility crop sprayer on the pad looked as if only its rust was holding it together. It was, to use Jussik's uncharacteristically colorful description, an old clunker. And somehow, it was taking them to Kilara. It wouldn't attract much attention flying over farming country unless, of course, it broke up in flight. This didn't seem out of the question.
Well, they don't build them like that anymore.
Fee said.
That's because not even the Hut Aviation Authority would certify this Narsh dirt crate airworthy.
Niner said, straining to prevent his pack from bending him over backward. He was laden with nearly double the 25-kilo weight he was used to carrying, along with a powered emergency chute. Niner had never actually come across the AJA, but he'd absorbed every scrap of intel, read, seen, or heard in his life.
Anyway, all it has to do is get us down there.
It's making a noble sacrifice, Jussik said, suddenly right behind them. He smiled and murmured, dirt crate, to himself as if it amused him. Niner wondered for a moment if he'd broken protocol by using the phrase. Are you certain you can do this? I could ask Master Zay if he would allow me to accompany you. Niner wanted to laugh. But you didn't laugh at a Jedi, especially one who seemed to care what happened to you.
We lost too many officers at Geonosis, sir. They cut rogue you to order.
The Padawan lowered his eyes for a second. It's considerate of you to think of me as an officer, Sergeant.
You're a commander now, sir. We won't let you down. There's nobody better prepared for this than us.
This is your first special operation, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Doesn't that worry you?
No, sir. Not at all. The 6 P's, sir. Proper planning prevents inadequate performance, sir.
Jussik appeared to be counting and then raised his eyebrows. This is real, Sergeant. Ah, for all their skills and wisdom, there were still some things that even Jedi didn't know. Niner hesitated to lecture Jussik. Real. Oh yes, Niner knew what real was, all right. Padawan Bardon Jussik had certainly never seen the killing house on Kamino. He'd never stormed the building, with its twisting corridors and innumerable flights of stairs. He didn't know how many commandos died in training when the rounds were live, and the terrorists, or whoever the directing staff were being that day, aimed to kill, and frequently did. He also had no idea what it was like spending 4 days lying prone in a scrape in the undergrowth, on observation, rifle ready, urinating where you lay because you couldn't move and give away your position. He had no idea how you learned to judge the amount of charge required for rapid entry to a building the hard way, because if you didn't get it just right, in a hurry, and under fire, it could blow your head clean off. 2-8 had learned that way. Jussik didn't know just how far and how long you could carry a wounded comrade when you had to. He probably didn't even know how to perform an emergency field tracheotomy with a vibroblade and a clean length of fuel line. It wasn't Jussik's fault. He had far bigger issues to worry about. There was no reason for a Jedi commander to concern himself with the details of a clone commando's life, but Niner thought he probably would, and he admired the Padawan all the more for that.
We'll be fine, sir.
Niner said.
The training is quite realistic.
Inside the shabby Narsh vessel, the tanks had been stripped out, and the bulkheads lined with security straps and stealth sheeting that would render the ship's cargo invisible to any probe or scan. Niner realized that 4 men would be pretty cramped in there with packs and weapons. A couple of Blastech E-Web repeating blasters were already stowed, and at Atten's request, 2 Trandoshan LJ-50 concussion rifles. Atten's livid face wound was looking less alarming now, but he always had a scar. The Bacta spray could fix plenty if you used it soon enough, but it couldn't reverse scarring. He pulled himself through the open hatch with an APC array blaster in one hand and his DC-17 strapped across his chest, just about keeping his balance under the weight of his pack. Darman, acting as loadmaster, gave him a helpful leg up and eyed the blaster.
Got a thing for Trandoshan technology?
Darman asked.
This will deal with the shields better than our E-Web.
Atten replied.
And that LJ-50 is a nice backup when we take out the facility, just in case. Republic doesn't make all the best gear.
Niner wondered if Atten ever talked about anything but gear. His squad must have been a miserable bunch with a miserable instructor. Clones might have looked utterly standardized to outsiders, but every squad was altered slightly by the cumulative effects of its experiences, including the influences of the individual trainers. Every commando battalion had its own non-clone instructor and seemed to take on some of his, or her, unique characteristics and vocabulary.
We learn.
Niner thought.
We learn fast. And unfortunately, we learn everything. Like dirt crate.
Every squad developed its own dynamics as well. It was part of their hardwired human biology. Put 4 men in a group, and soon they have a pecking order defined by the roles and foibles that accompanied them. Niner knew this, and he thought he knew Fee's, and he was pretty sure he knew where Darman was heading. But Atten wasn't sliding into place just yet. Fee had a Geonosian force bike. He hefted it and smiled.
Where did you get that?
Atten asked, suddenly interested.
Souvenir of Geonosis.
Fee said and winked.
Seemed ashamed to waste it.
He flipped it over in his hand and twirled it, arm outstretched, missing Atten by a calculated handspan. He didn't react.
You wouldn't even need to use the power setting, would you? This thing's heavy.
He brought it down in a slicing movement.
Wallop. That'll make their eyes water. I don't think I need any souvenirs of Geonosis.
Atten said. His tone was distinctly frosty.
Indelibly etched, you might say. Hey,
Niner cut in.
chat later.
He said.
Shifted people.
Niner already knew he would have his work cut out with Atten, and wondered if anything would trigger his natural urge to be one of the squad. He also wondered about his apparent negativity. He'll shake down. Sooner or later, he'll have to. Niner thought to himself. Backing up to a convenient ledge on the port bulkhead, Niner unclipped his backpack. 45 kilos lighter, he eased between Fee and Atten and peered into the cockpit. An R5 droid was at the controls. The unit was still fueling up the vessel from a droid bowser, burbling and whistling to itself. Niner leaned across to plug his datapad into the console to confirm the flight plan and synchronize it with the vessel's actual path. The R5 didn't take any notice. It would fly the route it was given. Improvising, thinking on his feet, making the most of the resources at hand, were all part of operating as a commando. But so was acquiring adequate intelligence. What they had wasn't enough to plan a mission, and that meant they would either have to acquire it in the field or fail. Niner didn't want to fail Padawan Jussik. He ejected his datapad and edged back to the hatch, trying not to clip Fee or Atten. Calm silence from the time you take off, Jussik said, leaning through the open hatch. The assault ship, the Majestic, is diverting to Kilara and will remain on station a parsec from the planet until she receives your request for extraction. Then gunships will be at your transmitted location within the hour. Niner almost asked just how long the Majestic might wait, but he feared it would look as if he doubted his squad's competence. He knew the answer. The ship would wait until Uthon was taken, even if that was several commando missions down the line. It wasn't waiting for them.
We won't keep the Majestic waiting.
Niner said. Anything else you need? Niner shook his head.
No, Commander.
Darman stood to one side of the ramp like an honor guard, waiting for the Jedi to leave. Very well, Jessic said, looking hesitant, as if he wanted to walk away but thought better of it. I hope to debrief you on your return. Niner took that literally, although Jessic was looking at him as if he meant something else. It made sense for the Padawan commander to process whatever intel they might gain. Jessic turned and walked away, and Darman jumped inside. The hatch closed with a slight shudder, sending fine fragments of rusted metal to the deck.
It only has to land.
Niner thought. He switched on the hollow projection on his datapad and studied the three-dimensional flight path over the fields, lakes, and forest. It was part real image, part simulation. Projected onto an existing chart, they were looking down at an area 30 clicks north of a small town called Imbrani. A single-story building with shabby sheet metal roofing, ringed by an incongruously well-cut expanse of grass, nestled in a plantation of kuvara trees. Some of the image was blurred, but it was the best resolution that a surveillance remote could manage at that distance above the planet. Specks, people, wandering around an encircling path.
It's the capture alive bit that complicates matters.
Darman said, gazing at the image over Niner's shoulder.
Or else we could just bomb it back to HUD space. That's why they created us.
Niner said.
For the complicated jobs.
He closed his eyes for a few moments to visualize the insertion. He saw it from takeoff to landing, smooth and planned. Every detail, or as many details as their incomplete intel could furnish, and his own experience of 100 exercises could confirm. In this detached state, something occurred to him. He pictured Jessic's face and his awkward, nervous shrugs. He realized what the Padawan had meant when he said he was hoping to debrief them personally on their return. He meant good luck. He wanted them to survive. Niner, who had known for as long as he could remember that he was a soldier bred to die, found that intriguing.
Imbrani, Kilara.
Gadans were about 30 centimeters long, fully grown, and it took a whole pack of them to bring down even a Merle calf. But at night, when they emerged from their warrens and hunted, the farmers locked their doors and stayed clear of the fields. It wasn't so much their teeth that the locals feared. It was the deadly bacteria the animals carried. A minor scratch or a bite was almost always fatal, and Master Fullier had used their entire supply of Bacchus spray in administering first aid to villagers, so Etain was as housebound at night as any of her hosts. She could hear the little predators outside, squabbling and scrabbling. She sat cross-legged on the mattress and chewed on the thin breads, almost hungry enough to gulp down the stew, but not that hungry.
A few bacteria are good for your immune system.
She thought,
You've probably eaten worse without knowing.
but she knew this time. Leaving the bowl where it stood, she rolled the holochart sphere over and over in her palms, running through all the possibilities for getting the information to the Jedi Council. Stow away in a transport? Possible. Transmit the data from ground? No. All transmissions were tightly controlled by the Neimoidians. Any other message traffic from Kilara to Coruscant would draw instant attention. There was always the possibility of finding the right droid courier, but that was a long shot, and it might take so much time as to be useless. Perhaps she'd have to do the job herself. Lightsabers were superb weapons, but right now she needed an army. The realization that she had beaten the odds to obtain valuable information, but was now unable to get it to those who needed it, almost crushed her.
I'm not done yet.
She said aloud, but she feared that she was, at least for the night. Her eyelids felt heavy, and she braced her elbows on her knees, letting her head rest in her hands. A good night's sleep. She might have a better idea in the morning. Her eyes closed. Images of Coruscant, her clan practicing passing a ball by thought alone, a nice hot bath, food she trusted to be clean. Then, suddenly, every fiber in her body leapt at once. Heart pounding, Etain thought at first that she had one of those half dreams of falling that sometimes came when she was dozing off. But now she was fully awake, and knew that she hadn't. Something had changed. Something in the Force had been altered, and forever. She jumped to her feet, suddenly clear what it was. She needed no training or education to understand it. Every instinct coded in her genes cried out. Someone was gone from the Force.
Master,
She said. She had suspected he was dead. Now she knew he was. And she knew it had happened right then. It was impossible not to wonder how and where, but she knew enough about the Neimoidians' hired muscle and their techniques to guess. Ignoring the ever-present Gadans, she went to the barn door and swung it open. It was an act of helplessness. There was nothing she could do, now or ever. Something rustled in the grass. It was a solitary something, and it sounded larger than a Gadan. She noticed for the first time that the constant snuffling and squabbling of the Gadan packs had stopped. They'd gone. Etain felt for her lightsaber just in case. Loud squawking and a flurry of wings made her start. A disturbed flock of leatherbacks rose into the air and scattered into the darkness, trailing sparks of light from their scales. Through the Force, she detected only small creatures with simple desires, and a male Merle wandering along the fence, armed with such fearsome tusks that not even Gadans would risk approaching him. She looked up at the night sky. It appeared unchanging, constant, but she knew it never was.
they're coming.
She thought she heard the old woman's voice. Putting it down to grief and lack of sleep, Etain stumbled back inside and barred the door.
Large utility vessel, lower atmosphere, Kilara.
It was just another crop sprayer, hired to dress the fields after the bark harvest, laden with bug killers and soil enhancers and piloted by a droid. At least that's what the Narsh Crate's transponder had told the Kilara traffic controller, and judging by the absence of a missile at the tailpipe, he had believed it. Darman was still exploring the enhancements to his helmet and suit.
I used to think I wore this armor,
He said.
now I think it's wearing me.
Yeah, they spent some credits upgrading this since last time.
Fee said.
Wow, walking weapon systems, eh?
200 clicks.
Atton said, without looking up from his datapad. He propped his helmet beside him with a tactical beam pointing up to provide some light in a closed bay. Darman couldn't hear him over the noise of the vessel's atmosphere engines, but he could lip read easily enough.
Let's hope everything works.
It was helmets on at 100 clicks. The squad was prepared for both a controlled landing and an early bailout in freefall if they were picked up by separatist ground units. Darman hoped their luck would hold. They were landing heavy, with more gear than they'd ever used in training, and they'd have to hit the drop zone accurately to avoid an impossible trek across country. Accurate, if they had to jump for it, meant high altitude, low opening procedure. They could drift for 50 clicks if they opted for the safer, slower, high opening technique. Darman didn't relish being defenseless in the air for that long. Niner was studying his datapad, balancing it on his right thigh. A three-dimensional shimmering hollow of their flight path played out a handspan above him. He glanced up at Darman and gave him a silent thumbs up. On course and on target. Darman returned the gesture. There was an art to loading up for a mission when carrying the firepower of a small army among 4 men. Darman had loaded his pack to capacity. The rest of his weapons and ordnance was in a second shockproof container that stood knee-high. The bowcaster, he'd loved that weapon, was strapped across his chest plate with jerry-rigged webbing to leave his hands free for the DC-17. He had an assortment of detonators kept safely separate from the charges and other ordnance in the lower section. He was now so heavy, even without the extra equipment, that he had to bounce to get upright from a sitting position. He rehearsed standing a few times. It was tough. Fortunately, the squad would be inserted close to the target. He didn't have to haul it far. 100 clicks, Atkins said. He switched off his spotlight. Helmets. The compartment was suddenly dark, and there was a collective hiss of helmet seals purging and re-engaging. They could only talk to each other at a very short range now. On Kilara, anything more than 10 meters risked detection. The only visible light was the faint blue glow from the heads-up display in their visors.